As the gentle evening shadows fall across the ancient manuscript collections housed in climate-controlled libraries around the world, where the patient work of biblical scholars and paleographers continues revealing the remarkable story of humanity's most controversial ancient text, we drift tonight into the profound mystery of the Book of Enoch, the forbidden apocalyptic work that vanished from Western Christianity for over a millennium before emerging from the remote highlands of Ethiopia to revolutionize modern understanding of early Jewish literature and the complex theological landscape that gave birth to Christianity itself. Let your mind float peacefully through the quiet fascination of this extraordinary rediscovery, where a single Scottish explorer's determination to reach the source of the Nile River led to one of the most significant manuscript finds in biblical archaeology, recovering a complete ancient text that early Christians had treasured but medieval authorities had systematically suppressed and forgotten. Close your eyes and feel the profound sense of scholarly excitement that must have characterized those first translations in the early 19th century, when European academics realized they possessed a comprehensive vision of antediluvian mysteries, angelic rebellions, and cosmic secrets that had influenced the development of both Judaism and Christianity while remaining hidden for centuries in the sacred libraries of Ethiopian Orthodox monasteries. Picture yourself in the candlelit scriptorium of an early Christian monastery around 400 CE, where dedicated scribes carefully copy theological texts while deliberately omitting certain works that church authorities have deemed too dangerous, too controversial, or too mystical for ordinary believers to possess and study. Among these forbidden manuscripts lies the Book of Enoch, a complex apocalyptic work attributed to the seventh patriarch mentioned in Genesis, the mysterious figure who walked with God for 365 years before being taken directly to heaven without experiencing death. The ancient text, originally composed in Aramaic during the tumultuous centuries of Second Temple Judaism, contained vivid descriptions of fallen angels, heavenly journeys, cosmic secrets, and prophetic visions that had profoundly influenced early Christian writers but gradually became viewed as theologically problematic by ecclesiastical authorities seeking to establish doctrinal uniformity and institutional control over biblical interpretation, the systematic suppression that characterized the Book of Enoch's disappearance from Western Christian tradition reflected broader patterns of theological consolidation during the 4th and 5th centuries, when imperial support for Orthodox Christianity created unprecedented opportunities for eliminating alternative religious texts and marginalizing diverse spiritual traditions that emphasized direct revelation, mystical experience, and esoteric knowledge over institutional authority and standardized doctrine. The patient work of early church fathers like Jerome and Augustine established canonical boundaries that excluded numerous ancient texts, including the Book of Enoch, despite its obvious influence on New Testament writings and its acceptance among respected Christian teachers and communities throughout the Mediterranean world. Watch as the remarkable story of preservation unfolds through the dedication of Ethiopian Orthodox Christians, who maintained complete manuscripts of the Book of Enoch in their ancient Ge'ez language while European Christianity forgot the text entirely. creating one of history's most dramatic examples of how marginalized communities can serve as guardians of essential cultural treasures that dominant civilizations abandon or destroy. The Ethiopian Church's conviction that Enoch represented authentic divine revelation enabled the survival of theological insights and mythological narratives that would otherwise have been lost forever to the forces of religious orthodoxy and institutional conformity that characterized medieval European Christianity. The accidental rediscovery that returned the Book of Enoch to Western scholarly attention occurred through the remarkable journey of James Bruce, the Scottish explorer who spent 6 years in Abyssinia between 1768 and 1774 while attempting to locate the source of the Blue Nile River. Inadvertently stumbling upon one of biblical archaeology's most significant manuscript discoveries when Ethiopian monks presented him with 3 complete copies of this long-lost ancient text written in the classical Ethiopian language that had preserved its contents virtually unchanged for over 15 centuries. The archaeological validation that confirmed the Book of Enoch's genuine antiquity came through the remarkable discovery of Aramaic fragments among the Dead Sea Scrolls found in Qumran caves beginning in 1947, where systematic excavation revealed that Essene communities had preserved multiple copies of different Enochic texts, proving that these works had been composed centuries earlier than critics had suggested, while demonstrating their widespread acceptance among diverse Jewish groups during the Second Temple period. The paleographic analysis of these ancient manuscript fragments established that the core sections of the Book of Enoch dated to at least the 3rd century BCE, making them among the oldest surviving examples of Jewish apocalyptic literature. The textual complexity that characterizes the Book of Enoch reflects its composition by multiple authors over several centuries, creating a diverse collection of related works that scholars traditionally divide into 5 major sections. The Book of Watchers, which narrates the rebellion of fallen angels and their corrupting influence on antediluvian humanity. The Astronomical Book, which preserves ancient Jewish understanding of celestial mechanics and calendar systems. The Book of Parables, which contains messianic prophecies and visions of divine judgment. The Apocalypse of Weeks, which presents a systematic overview of human history from creation to eschatological fulfillment, and the Epistle of Enoch, which offers moral exhortation and theological reflection on the relationship between righteous and wicked behavior. The scholarly significance that the Book of Enoch has achieved in contemporary biblical studies extends far beyond its historical curiosity to encompass fundamental questions about the development of Jewish apocalyptic thought, the theological background of early Christianity, and the complex processes through which ancient religious communities created, transmitted, and preserved literary works that expressed their deepest convictions about divine reality, cosmic order, and human destiny within the broader framework of sacred history and eschatological hope. The influence that Enochic literature exercised on New Testament writers becomes evident through systematic comparison of themes, imagery, and theological concepts, where careful analysis reveals that early Christian authors drew extensively upon Enochic traditions when developing their understanding of angelic hierarchies, messianic expectations, final judgment, and the cosmic dimensions of salvation history that would become central to Orthodox Christian doctrine and spiritual practice. The controversial aspects that led to the Book of Enoch's exclusion from biblical canon include its detailed angelology, its attribution of evil's origins to fallen angels rather than human moral failure, its emphasis on esoteric knowledge and mystical revelation, and its sophisticated mythology of cosmic conflict between spiritual forces of good and evil that some church authorities viewed as incompatible with emerging theological consensus about divine sovereignty, human responsibility, and the proper sources of religious authority and spiritual guidance. The contemporary relevance that scholars recognize in Enochic literature includes its contribution to understanding Second Temple Judaism's remarkable theological diversity, its illumination of early Christian development within broader ancient Jewish apocalyptic movements, and its preservation of alternative approaches to fundamental questions about theodicy, eschatology, and the relationship between divine revelation and human wisdom that continue challenging modern religious communities seeking authentic approaches to ancient spiritual traditions. As we begin this gentle exploration of the Book of Enoch's remarkable journey from ancient Jewish apocalypticism through medieval suppression to modern scholarly recognition, we enter a realm where patient manuscript preservation meets archaeological discovery, where theological controversy illuminates the complex processes of canon formation, and where ancient visions of cosmic conflict and divine justice continue offering insights into humanity's enduring quest to understand our place within the mysterious patterns of sacred history and ultimate destiny. The gentle rhythm of manuscript transmission and the eternal commitment to preserving ancient wisdom carry continuing invitations to appreciate both the remarkable dedication of Ethiopian Orthodox communities who maintain this forbidden text across 15 centuries of Western neglect and the patient scholarly work that enables contemporary readers to encounter theological insights and mythological narratives that might otherwise have been lost forever to the forces of religious conformity and institutional control that characterized medieval Christianity's approach to textual authority and spiritual diversity. As the gentle morning light illuminates the ancient scribal chambers where Hebrew genealogies were carefully preserved on precious parchment, where patient scholars trace the lineages of humanity's earliest patriarchs through generations of oral tradition and sacred memory, we drift tonight into the enigmatic story of Enoch himself, the mysterious seventh patriarch from Adam, whose brief biblical mention has inspired more theological speculation and visionary literature than perhaps any other antediluvian figure in sacred history. Let your mind float peacefully through the quiet contemplation of this remarkable man who lived 365 years in perfect harmony with divine will, whose life bridged the gap between heaven and earth so completely that Genesis records the extraordinary statement, "Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, because God took him." A tantalizing glimpse into ancient traditions of direct divine encounter that would later blossom into the comprehensive visionary literature that bears his name. Close your eyes and feel the profound mystery that surrounds this antediluvian sage, whose earthly sojourn ended not in death but in translation, whose moral perfection and spiritual insight made him the ideal figure to whom later Jewish communities would attribute their most sophisticated revelations about cosmic secrets, angelic hierarchies, and the divine plans for human history and ultimate judgment. Picture yourself among the ancient Hebrew storytellers who preserved the genealogical records of humanity's earliest generations, where Enoch appears in the genealogy of Seth as the son of Jared and the father of Methuselah, occupying the seventh position in the lineage that extends from Adam to Noah, a numerical placement that ancient Near Eastern cultures associated with completeness and divine favor, suggesting that Enoch's special relationship with God was understood to be part of providential design rather than accidental achievement. The genealogical context that surrounds Enoch's brief appearance in Genesis chapter 5 emphasizes both his integration within normal human family structures and his extraordinary spiritual status that set him apart from all other antediluvian patriarchs except Noah, creating the biographical foundation upon which later Jewish communities would construct their elaborate mythologies of heavenly ascent and cosmic revelation. The biblical description of Enoch's relationship with God employs the distinctive Hebrew phrase hithalek at har Elohim, which can be translated as walked with God or walked habitually with God, indicating not a single mystical experience but rather a sustained pattern of intimate divine communion that characterized Enoch's entire adult life and enabled him to achieve the unprecedented spiritual maturity that made direct translation to heaven possible without experiencing the corruption of physical death that affects all other human beings. This unique phraseology appears again in Genesis only in reference to Noah, suggesting that both Enoch and Noah represented exceptional examples of antediluvian righteousness, who maintained proper relationships with divine authority despite the increasing moral corruption that would eventually necessitate the cleansing judgment of the flood. Watch as the scholarly investigation of Enoch's historical development reveals how this brief biblical figure became the focal point for extensive Second Temple Jewish speculation about the possibility of human access to divine secrets and the role that specially chosen individuals might play in mediating between heavenly wisdom and earthly communities requiring guidance for navigating moral complexity and cosmic uncertainty. The transformation of the simple biblical Enoch into the visionary protagonist of elaborate apocalyptic literature reflects the creative theological work of Jewish communities who were attempting to understand their place within divine history while maintaining hope that righteous individuals could transcend the limitations of ordinary human existence through appropriate spiritual discipline and divine favor. The chronological details that Genesis provides about Enoch's lifespan, 365 years, corresponding to the number of days in the solar year, suggests symbolic rather than merely literal significance, where ancient authors may have intended to indicate Enoch's perfect harmony with cosmic order and natural rhythms that enabled him to achieve the spiritual integration necessary for direct translation to the heavenly realm. The precision of this numerical correspondence demonstrates the sophisticated theological reflection that characterized ancient Hebrew approaches to understanding the relationship between earthly time and eternal purposes, where individual human lives could serve as microcosms of universal principles governing the interaction between temporal existence and transcendent divine reality. The historical context within which later Jewish communities developed their elaborate Enochic traditions includes the challenging circumstances of Second Temple Judaism, where foreign domination, religious persecution, and internal theological disputes created urgent needs for accessing divine guidance and maintaining hope that God remained committed to ultimate justice and redemption despite apparent evidence of divine absence or indifference to righteous suffering. The figure of Enoch, who had successfully bridged the gap between human limitation and divine transcendence, provided an ideal vehicle for expressing theological convictions about the possibility of direct revelation and the ultimate vindication of righteous individuals who maintained faith despite challenging circumstances. The development of Enochic literature during the centuries preceding and following the emergence of Christianity reflects broader patterns in ancient Jewish thought, where apocalyptic imagination served both theological and psychological functions by providing frameworks for understanding present suffering within the context of ultimate divine purpose and promised eschatological resolution that would restore proper cosmic order and vindicate the faith of those who had remained loyal to divine commands despite persecution and hardship. The attribution of extensive visionary literature to Enoch enabled ancient Jewish authors to present their theological insights with the authority of antediluvian revelation while maintaining anonymity and avoiding direct confrontation with religious authorities who might oppose their teachings. The literary tradition that grew around Enoch's figure includes not only the major work known as 1 Enoch or the Ethiopic Enoch, but also related texts such as 2 Enoch, the Slavonic Enoch, 3 Enoch, the Hebrew Enoch, and the Book of Jubilees, which contains additional Enochic traditions, demonstrating the remarkable fertility of this figure for Jewish theological imagination and the sustained interest that ancient communities maintained in exploring the implications of Enoch's unique relationship with divine reality. The diversity of Enochic literature suggests that multiple Jewish communities found in this antediluvian patriarch valuable resources for addressing different theological concerns while maintaining shared convictions about the possibility of transcending ordinary human limitations through appropriate spiritual development and divine favor. The theological significance that Enoch acquired in Jewish tradition extends beyond his function as a vehicle for apocalyptic revelation to encompass broader questions about human destiny, the nature of righteousness, and the possibility of achieving spiritual perfection that enables direct participation in divine life rather than merely receiving external divine commands or promises. The traditional understanding that Enoch was transformed into the angel Metatron, the prince of the divine presence who serves as God's vizier and the primary intermediary between divine and human realms, reflects ancient Jewish convictions about the ultimate potential for human spiritual development and the continuity between earthly righteousness and heavenly authority. The influence that Enochic traditions exercised on early Christian thought becomes evident through careful analysis of New Testament texts, particularly the Epistle of Jude, which explicitly quotes from 1 Enoch, and various passages in the Gospels and Pauline letters that employ Enochic imagery and theological concepts while adapting them to distinctly Christian concerns about the nature of Jesus' messianic authority and the eschatological implications of his death and resurrection. The early Christian appreciation for Enochic literature suggests that these ancient Jewish texts provided valuable resources for understanding Jesus' role as mediator between divine and human realms, while offering frameworks for comprehending the cosmic significance of Christian salvation and the ultimate destiny of faithful believers. The scholarly debate that surrounds the historical question of whether Enoch represents a purely literary figure or preserves memories of an actual antediluvian sage reflects broader methodological challenges in biblical studies, where ancient texts serve simultaneously as historical sources and theological documents that require careful analysis to distinguish between legendary development and possible historical kernels that may underlie later mythological elaboration. The consensus among contemporary scholars suggests that while Enoch as described in later apocalyptic literature clearly represents extensive legendary development, the biblical figure may preserve ancient Near Eastern traditions about exceptional individuals who achieved special relationships with divine reality through extraordinary righteousness and spiritual insight. The comparative analysis that connects Enochic traditions with similar figures in other ancient Near Eastern cultures, such as the Mesopotamian Enmeduranki and Utu-Abzu, reveals common patterns in how ancient communities understood the possibility of human access to divine knowledge and the role that specially chosen individuals played in preserving and transmitting essential wisdom for future generations, requiring guidance about moral behavior and cosmic meaning. These comparative perspectives demonstrate that Jewish Enochic traditions, while distinctive in their specific content and theological development, participate in broader ancient Near Eastern patterns of thought about the relationship between human wisdom and divine revelation as we contemplate the remarkable transformation of the simple biblical Enoch into the protagonist of extensive apocalyptic literature. We witness how ancient religious communities could take minimal historical materials and develop them into comprehensive theological systems that addressed their deepest concerns about divine justice, human destiny, and the possibility of transcending the limitations of ordinary existence through appropriate spiritual development and divine favor. The patient work of both ancient Jewish authors and modern scholars continues, revealing new dimensions of how Enochic traditions served ancient communities while providing contemporary readers with valuable insights into the remarkable creativity and theological sophistication that characterized Second Temple Judaism's approach to understanding divine mystery and human spiritual potential. The gentle rhythm of ancient genealogies and the eternal quest for divine encounter carry continuing invitations to appreciate both the historical specificity of biblical traditions and their remarkable capacity for creative theological development that serves the spiritual needs of communities seeking to understand their place within divine purposes that transcend the limitations of immediate historical circumstances, while offering hope for ultimate vindication and eternal participation in divine life and cosmic harmony. As the gentle twilight settles over the ancient scribal chambers where Second Temple Jewish scholars carefully preserved their most profound theological reflections about the origins of evil and cosmic disorder, we drift tonight into the central narrative that has made the Book of Enoch both fascinating and controversial across 2 millennia of religious thought. The detailed account of the Watchers' rebellion, where 200 angels descended from their heavenly stations to corrupt antediluvian humanity through forbidden knowledge and illicit unions that gave birth to the race of giants known as Nephilim. Let your mind float peacefully through the systematic theology of ancient Jewish communities who developed this sophisticated mythology to explain the persistent presence of evil in God's creation while maintaining divine justice and ultimate sovereignty over cosmic affairs. Close your eyes and feel the profound seriousness with which ancient theologians approached these questions about the relationship between spiritual beings and human moral development, creating narrative frameworks that would influence Jewish and Christian thought about temptation, corruption, and divine judgment for centuries to come, while preserving insights about the cosmic dimensions of ethical behavior and spiritual responsibility. Picture yourself among the scholarly communities of Second Temple Judaism as they wrestled with the mysterious passage in Genesis chapter 6 that briefly mentions how the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Developing this cryptic biblical reference into a comprehensive mythology that explained not only the origins of the antediluvian giants, but also the source of all forbidden knowledge and technological advancement that had corrupted humanity before the flood. The Book of Enoch's account expands this brief Genesis narrative into a detailed story of 200 angels who, led by their chief Semjaza, descended to Mount Hermon and made a binding oath to carry out their plan to take human wives despite knowing that their actions violated divine law and cosmic order. The systematic organization that characterizes the Watchers' rebellion reflects ancient Jewish understanding of how spiritual corruption spreads through organized conspiracy and mutual reinforcement of evil intentions, where the 200 angels divided themselves into groups of 10 under the leadership of 20 chief watchers whose names are carefully preserved in the text: Semjaza, Arakiel, Ramiel, Kokabiel, Tamiel, Ramiel, Daniel, Ezekiel, Barakijel, Osoel, Amaros, Batril, Ananel, Zachiel, Samsapil, Satarel, Turel, Jomjael, Seriel, and Azazel, each responsible for teaching different aspects of forbidden knowledge while participating in the collective corruption of human society through intermarriage and technological instruction. Watch as the ancient narrative unfolds through the careful description of how each group of fallen angels contributed specific types of forbidden knowledge that would corrupt different aspects of human civilization. Azazel taught humans the arts of war through metallurgy and weapon making, the crafting of ornaments and cosmetics that encouraged vanity and sexual corruption. Semjaza taught enchantments and root cutting for magical purposes. Amaros taught the resolving of enchantments. Barakijel taught astrology. Kokabiel taught the constellations. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of clouds. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun. And Seriel taught the course of the moon. creating a comprehensive curriculum of esoteric knowledge that enabled human technological advancement while separating humanity from proper dependence upon divine guidance and natural law. The theological sophistication that underlies this mythology reflects ancient Jewish attempts to maintain both divine sovereignty and human moral responsibility while explaining the evident presence of evil, suffering, and injustice in God's creation through a narrative framework that attributes the ultimate source of corruption to spiritual beings whose rebellion preceded and enabled human moral failure. The Watcher's rebellion serves as the cosmic background that explains how evil entered the world while preserving the essential goodness of God's original creation and the possibility of ultimate divine victory over forces of corruption and chaos. The intermarriage between angels and human women that forms the central transgression of the Watcher's rebellion represents ancient Jewish understanding of how spiritual corruption manifests through the violation of proper boundaries between different orders of creation, where the angels' abandonment of their assigned roles in the heavenly hierarchy enables the birth of the Nephilim, a race of giants whose enormous size, supernatural strength, and violent appetites represent the monstrous consequences of mixing spiritual and material natures in ways that violate divine order and cosmic law. The systematic description of the Nephilim's destructive impact upon antediluvian civilization reflects ancient theological conviction that evil spreads exponentially once proper boundaries are violated, where the giants' consumption of all human food stores, their cannibalistic appetite for human flesh, and their pollution of the earth with bloodshed demonstrate how spiritual rebellion inevitably leads to material corruption and social collapse that threatens the survival of innocent humanity and the integrity of natural order established by divine wisdom and creative purpose. The divine response that the Book of Enoch describes to the Watcher's rebellion emphasizes both immediate judgment upon the rebellious angels and long-term restoration of cosmic order through the preservation of righteous humanity and the eventual establishment of divine justice that will vindicate those who remained faithful despite living among corruption and violence. The archangels Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel serve as agents of divine justice who bind the fallen Watchers in eternal punishment while ensuring that their offspring will be destroyed and their forbidden knowledge will ultimately serve divine purposes rather than enabling permanent corruption of creation. The prophetic dimensions of the Watcher's narrative include detailed descriptions of how divine judgment will unfold through natural disasters, warfare, and eventual cosmic restoration that will eliminate all traces of corruption while establishing permanent conditions for righteousness and peace. The Book of Enoch presents these eschatological themes as direct revelation from God to Enoch during his heavenly journeys, creating authoritative frameworks for understanding how present suffering and injustice fit within ultimate divine purposes that ensure the final victory of good over evil. The influence that the Watcher's mythology exercised upon subsequent Jewish and Christian thought becomes evident through careful analysis of Second Temple literature, New Testament writings, and early Christian theological development, where themes of fallen angels, spiritual warfare, forbidden knowledge, and cosmic judgment provided essential conceptual frameworks for understanding the nature of temptation, the origins of evil, and the cosmic significance of redemption through divine intervention in human history. The scholarly significance that contemporary biblical studies recognizes in the Watcher's narrative extends beyond its historical importance for understanding Second Temple Judaism. To encompass its contribution to comparative mythology, ancient Near Eastern religious studies, and the development of apocalyptic literature that would profoundly influence both Jewish and Christian approaches to understanding cosmic conflict, divine justice, and ultimate restoration of proper order through eschatological judgment and renewal. The textual complexity that characterizes different versions of the Watcher's story reflects the dynamic nature of ancient Jewish theological reflection, where successive generations of scribes and scholars adapted traditional materials to address contemporary concerns while maintaining essential insights about the relationship between spiritual rebellion and human corruption. The Dead Sea Scrolls preserve multiple versions of Enochic traditions that demonstrate how ancient communities continued developing these themes while preserving their fundamental theological significance. The comparative analysis that connects the Watcher's mythology with similar traditions in other ancient Near Eastern cultures reveals common patterns in how different civilizations understood the relationship between divine beings and human society, while highlighting the distinctive contributions that Jewish theological reflection made to understanding moral responsibility, cosmic order, and the possibility of divine redemption despite the evident presence of evil and suffering in human experience. The psychological insights that emerge from careful study of the Watcher's narrative include recognition that ancient communities possessed sophisticated understanding of how evil spreads through social networks, how technological knowledge can serve either beneficial or destructive purposes depending upon moral context, and how individual choices about loyalty and rebellion have cosmic significance that extends far beyond immediate personal consequences. The literary artistry that characterizes the Book of Enoch's presentation of the Watcher's rebellion demonstrates the remarkable creative abilities of ancient Jewish authors who transformed brief biblical references into comprehensive mythological narratives that address fundamental theological questions while maintaining dramatic narrative interest and emotional engagement that continues attracting contemporary readers seeking insight into eternal questions about good and evil, divine justice, and human destiny as we contemplate the profound theological sophistication of the Watcher's rebellion narrative. We witness how ancient Jewish communities developed comprehensive frameworks for understanding the cosmic dimensions of moral choice while maintaining conviction that divine justice ultimately prevails over spiritual rebellion and human corruption. The patient work of both ancient scribes and modern scholars continues revealing new dimensions of how these mythological traditions served ancient communities while providing contemporary readers with valuable insights into timeless questions about the nature of evil, the possibility of redemption, and the ultimate triumph of divine purposes over forces of chaos and destruction. The gentle rhythm of ancient storytelling and the eternal quest for understanding evil's origins carry continuing invitations to appreciate both the intellectual sophistication and spiritual insight that characterize systematic approaches to theological questions that transcend particular historical circumstances while providing frameworks for hope and moral clarity despite evident corruption and injustice in human experience. As the gentle highland winds sweep across the ancient plateaus of Abyssinia, where the eternal rhythms of Ethiopian civilization have preserved sacred treasures through centuries of isolation from the broader Christian world, we drift tonight into the remarkable adventure of James Bruce. The Scottish explorer whose relentless pursuit of the Nile's source led to one of biblical archaeology's most extraordinary discoveries when Ethiopian Orthodox monks presented him with 3 complete manuscripts of the Book of Enoch that had been lost to Western Christianity for over a millennium. Let your mind float peacefully through the patient determination of this 18th-century adventurer, whose 6-year sojourn in the remote highlands of Ethiopia between 1768 and 1774 transformed him from a curious traveler into the unwitting guardian of ancient theological treasures that would revolutionize modern understanding of early Jewish apocalyptic literature and its profound influence on Christian development. Close your eyes and feel the quiet excitement that must have characterized those moments in Ethiopian monasteries when Bruce realized he possessed manuscripts containing the complete text of a forbidden book that European scholars had presumed lost forever, creating one of history's most serendipitous encounters between geographic exploration and manuscript discovery. Picture yourself beside James Bruce as he undertakes the arduous journey from Alexandria southward along the Nile River, driven by the consuming ambition to locate the source of the Blue Nile that had eluded European explorers for centuries, while inadvertently positioning himself to recover ancient religious texts that had survived in splendid isolation within the manuscript collections of Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity. The Ethiopian Church's unique theological heritage, which had developed independently from both Eastern and Western Christian traditions since the 4th century, included canonical acceptance of numerous ancient texts that other Christian communities had rejected or forgotten, creating perfect conditions for preserving complete versions of works like the Book of Enoch that existed elsewhere only in fragmentary quotations or hostile summaries provided by early church fathers. The systematic manuscript culture that characterized Ethiopian Orthodox monasteries reflected centuries of dedicated scribal work that had maintained ancient Ge'ez translations of theological texts through careful copying and preservation despite the challenging climatic conditions and political instability that had periodically threatened the survival of these precious cultural resources. The Ethiopian monks who welcomed Bruce possessed sophisticated understanding of their manuscript heritage, recognizing the historical and theological significance of texts that they had faithfully preserved while remaining aware that much of their literary treasury was unknown to the broader Christian world that had developed along different theological and canonical trajectories. Watch as Bruce's initial encounters with Ethiopian religious culture reveal the remarkable theological sophistication of communities that had maintained direct continuity with ancient Christian traditions while developing distinctive approaches to scriptural interpretation and canonical authority that included acceptance of numerous texts rejected by other Christian churches. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church's biblical canon included not only the standard Old and New Testament books recognized by other Christian communities, but also additional works such as the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and other ancient Jewish texts that provided comprehensive frameworks for understanding salvation history from creation through eschatological fulfillment. The diplomatic challenges that Bruce navigated during his Ethiopian residence included complex negotiations with imperial authorities, regional nobles, and ecclesiastical leaders who controlled access to the manuscript collections housed in ancient monasteries scattered throughout the highland regions that had served as repositories of Christian learning and textual preservation since the earliest centuries of Ethiopian conversion to Christianity. Bruce's success in gaining access to these precious manuscripts reflected both his personal charm and diplomatic skills, and the Ethiopian Church's recognition that sharing their theological heritage with European scholars might serve broader Christian unity and mutual understanding despite significant differences in doctrine and practice. The manuscript discoveries that Bruce achieved during his Ethiopian sojourn included not only the 3 complete copies of the Book of Enoch that would transform Western biblical scholarship, but also numerous other ancient texts that illuminated the remarkable theological diversity and intellectual sophistication that had characterized Ethiopian Christian culture across 15 centuries of independent development. The systematic approach that Ethiopian scribes had employed for manuscript preservation included careful attention to textual accuracy, systematic copying procedures, and protective storage methods that had enabled these ancient works to survive in remarkably pristine condition despite the challenging environmental conditions that had threatened many other manuscript collections throughout the ancient world. The return journey that brought Bruce's Ethiopian manuscripts to European scholarly attention required careful planning and protective measures to ensure that these irreplaceable cultural treasures survived the arduous overland travel through desert regions and sea voyages that could easily have destroyed the precious parchment and ink that preserved texts unknown to Western scholarship for over a millennium. Bruce's recognition of the historical significance of his manuscript discoveries motivated extraordinary efforts to safeguard these materials while returning to Britain, where he correctly anticipated that scholars would recognize their importance for understanding early Christian development and the complex theological landscape of Second Temple Judaism. The initial reception that characterized European scholarly responses to Bruce's Ethiopian manuscripts reflected both excitement about recovering lost ancient texts and skepticism about their authenticity and historical value, where some academics questioned whether these GEZ versions accurately represented ancient Jewish writings or instead reflected later Ethiopian theological development that had adapted earlier traditions to serve distinctive doctrinal purposes. The systematic analysis required to establish the authenticity and historical significance of Bruce's manuscript discoveries would require decades of careful scholarly work by specialists in Semitic languages, comparative religious studies, and early Christian history. The translation projects that emerged from Bruce's manuscript discoveries began with Richard Lawrence's pioneering English translation published at Oxford in 1821, which provided European readers with their first comprehensive access to the complete Book of Enoch while establishing methodological precedents for approaching ancient texts that had been preserved in languages and cultural contexts unfamiliar to Western biblical scholarship. Lawrence's work, despite its limitations and occasional inaccuracies, opened new avenues of research into early Jewish apocalyptic literature while demonstrating the remarkable theological sophistication of ancient communities that had developed comprehensive frameworks for understanding cosmic conflict, divine judgment, and eschatological hope. The comparative significance that scholars gradually recognized in the Ethiopian Book of Enoch included its illumination of numerous puzzling references. In canonical biblical texts, its preservation of ancient Jewish traditions about angelology and cosmology, and its demonstration of the remarkable theological creativity that had characterized Second Temple Judaism during the crucial centuries that witnessed the emergence of Christianity. The availability of complete texts enabled systematic analysis of themes, literary structures, and theological concepts that had previously been accessible only through fragmentary quotations or hostile paraphrases provided by early church fathers who had opposed these traditions. The archaeological validation that would eventually confirm the antiquity and authenticity of the Ethiopian Enoch manuscripts came through the remarkable discovery of Aramaic fragments among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Beginning in 1947, where systematic excavation of Qumran caves revealed that Jewish communities had indeed preserved multiple copies of Enochic literature during the Second Temple period, proving that Bruce's Ethiopian manuscripts accurately represented ancient Jewish writings rather than later Ethiopian compositions or adaptations. The scholarly recognition that Bruce's discovery achieved in contemporary biblical studies extends far beyond its historical curiosity to encompass fundamental contributions to understanding the development of early Christian theology, the diversity of Second Temple Jewish thought, and the complex processes through which ancient religious communities created, transmitted, and preserved literary works that expressed their deepest convictions about divine reality and human destiny. The patient work of manuscript preservation that Ethiopian Orthodox communities had maintained across 15 centuries created unprecedented opportunities for modern scholars to encounter ancient theological traditions in their complete literary contexts. The institutional preservation that has ensured continued access to Bruce's Ethiopian manuscripts includes their careful conservation in major research libraries, where the 3 copies he recovered have been supplemented by additional Ethiopian manuscripts discovered by subsequent explorers and scholars, while serving as foundational resources for ongoing research into early Jewish apocalyptic literature and its influence on Christian development. The British Museum, the Bodleian Library at Oxford, and the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris house Bruce's original discoveries, which continue serving researchers worldwide who seek understanding of ancient theological traditions and their contemporary relevance. The broader implications of Bruce's accidental manuscript discovery include recognition that marginalized religious communities can serve as guardians of essential cultural treasures that dominant civilizations abandon or destroy, while demonstrating how geographic exploration and cultural encounter can produce unexpected scholarly benefits that transcend the immediate objectives of particular expeditions or research projects. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church's dedication to preserving ancient texts that other Christian communities had rejected enabled recovery of theological insights that might otherwise have been lost forever to historical amnesia and institutional suppression. As we contemplate the remarkable circumstances that enabled James Bruce's recovery of the complete Book of Enoch from Ethiopian monasteries, we witness how patient manuscript preservation and adventurous scholarship can combine to restore access to ancient wisdom that illuminates both historical understanding and contemporary spiritual reflection. The gentle rhythm of monastic copying and the eternal commitment to preserving sacred texts carry continuing invitations to appreciate both the dedication of Ethiopian Orthodox communities who maintained forbidden books across 15 centuries of Western neglect and the scholarly curiosity that enabled European academics to recognize the historical significance of theological traditions that challenged conventional assumptions about early Christian development and canonical authority. As the gentle desert winds sweep across the barren cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea, where the eternal silence of the Judean wilderness has guarded ancient secrets beneath limestone caves for nearly 2 millennia, we drift tonight into the extraordinary archaeological discovery that vindicated James Bruce's Ethiopian manuscripts and revolutionized modern understanding of early Jewish literature. The systematic excavation of Qumran caves beginning in 1947 that revealed Aramaic fragments of the Book of Enoch, among the most significant manuscript finds in biblical archaeology. Let your mind float peacefully through the patient scientific methodology that characterized this remarkable recovery of ancient texts, where Bedouin shepherds searching for lost goats inadvertently stumbled upon clay jars containing leather scrolls that would confirm the genuine antiquity of Enochic literature, while providing unprecedented insights into the theological diversity and intellectual sophistication of Second Temple Jewish communities. Close your eyes and feel the profound scholarly excitement that must have characterized those first translations of Aramaic Enoch fragments, when international teams of paleographers and biblical scholars realized they possessed direct evidence from the 3rd century BCE that validated Ethiopian manuscript traditions while demonstrating the widespread acceptance of apocalyptic literature among diverse Jewish groups during the crucial centuries that witnessed Christianity's emergence. Picture yourself among the international scholarly community that gathered at the École Biblique in Jerusalem during the 1950s, where systematic analysis of Dead Sea Scroll materials revealed that Cave 4 at Qumran had preserved fragments from at least 7 different manuscripts of Enochic literature, representing multiple sections of the composite work that Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity had maintained in complete form for over 15 centuries. The careful paleographic analysis conducted by specialists like John Strugnell and Joseph Milik established that these Aramaic fragments dated to the period between 250 BCE, making them among the oldest surviving examples of Second Temple Jewish literature, while providing irrefutable evidence that the Book of Enoch represented authentic ancient Jewish theological reflection rather than later Ethiopian composition or adaptation. the systematic excavation methodology that characterized the Qumran archaeological project reflected mid-20th century advances in scientific archaeology, where Roland de Vos and his international team employed stratigraphic analysis, ceramic typology, and radiocarbon dating to establish precise chronological frameworks for understanding when the Essene community had inhabited the settlement and under what circumstances they had concealed their precious library in protective caves before the Roman destruction of the site around 68 CE. The careful documentation of artifact locations, architectural remains, and manuscript distribution patterns created comprehensive databases that enabled scholars to reconstruct the social, economic, and religious life of the community that had preserved these ancient texts. Watch as the painstaking process of fragment identification and textual reconstruction reveals the remarkable scope of Enochic literature that had circulated among Second Temple Jewish communities, where the Qumran. Discoveries included portions of the Book of Watchers, the Astronomical Book, the Book of Dreams, and other sections that demonstrated the composite nature of the work while confirming the essential accuracy of the Ethiopian textual tradition that Bruce had recovered from Abyssinian monasteries in 1773. The comparative analysis between Aramaic fragments and Ge'ez manuscripts illuminated both the remarkable fidelity of ancient translation practices and the complex processes through which multilingual manuscript traditions had preserved essential theological insights across centuries of cultural transmission. The technical challenges that confronted scholars working with the Dead Sea Scroll fragments included the deteriorated condition of leather and papyrus materials that had been damaged by centuries of exposure to moisture, temperature fluctuations, and occasional disturbance by animals or treasure hunters who had accessed the caves before systematic archaeological investigation could protect these irreplaceable cultural resources. The development of specialized conservation techniques, photographic documentation methods, and chemical treatments enabled researchers to stabilize fragile materials while creating permanent records that would remain accessible for continued study even if the original fragments suffered further deterioration. The collaborative international effort that characterized Dead Sea Scroll research brought together specialists in Semitic languages, comparative religion, archaeological methodology, and ancient history from universities and research institutions worldwide, creating unprecedented opportunities for interdisciplinary analysis that combined philological expertise with historical investigation and archaeological evidence to produce comprehensive understanding of Second Temple Jewish intellectual, culture, and religious diversity. The systematic publication of critical editions, translations, and scholarly commentaries made these discoveries accessible to broader academic communities while establishing methodological precedents for approaching other ancient manuscript finds. The linguistic significance of the Aramaic Enoch fragments extended beyond their confirmation of the text's antiquity to encompass fundamental contributions to understanding the development of Jewish literature during the crucial centuries when Hebrew was gradually being supplemented by Aramaic as the primary language of theological reflection and community instruction. The careful analysis of orthographic practices, grammatical structures, and vocabulary choices preserved in the Qumran fragments provided essential data for reconstructing the linguistic environment within which early Jewish apocalyptic literature had developed, while demonstrating the sophisticated literary capabilities of ancient Jewish authors. The theological implications of finding Enochic literature among the Dead Sea Scrolls included recognition that apocalyptic traditions had enjoyed much broader acceptance within Second Temple Judaism than previous scholarship had recognized, where the presence of multiple Enoch manuscripts alongside biblical texts, sectarian regulations, and liturgical materials suggested that these works served essential functions for community identity, theological education, and spiritual formation among Jews who were attempting to maintain covenant faithfulness despite foreign domination and internal religious conflicts. The sectarian context that characterized the Qumran community's preservation of Enochic literature reflected their particular approach to Jewish religious practice, where emphasis on ritual purity, eschatological expectation, and opposition to the Jerusalem temple establishment created theological frameworks that found valuable resources in apocalyptic traditions about cosmic conflict, divine judgment, and the ultimate vindication of righteous communities who maintained proper covenant relationships despite persecution and marginalization by religious and political authorities. The comparative manuscript analysis that became possible through the Qumran discoveries enabled scholars to trace the textual history of Enochic literature while identifying different recensions, editorial editions, and translation practices that illuminated how ancient Jewish communities had adapted traditional materials to address contemporary theological concerns and community needs. The recognition that the Book of Enoch represented centuries of creative theological development by multiple authors and editors enhanced appreciation for the sophisticated intellectual processes that had characterized Second Temple Jewish approaches to understanding divine revelation and cosmic meaning. The archaeological context provided by the Qumran settlement remains enabled researchers to understand the social and economic circumstances within which the Essene community had developed their distinctive approach to Jewish religious practice while maintaining extensive manuscript collections that served both educational and liturgical purposes for community members who had withdrawn from mainstream Jewish society to establish alternative approaches to covenant faithfulness and religious purity based on their interpretation of prophetic traditions and eschatological expectations. The preservation techniques that had enabled the survival of organic materials in the arid climate of the Dead Sea region demonstrated how favorable environmental conditions could create natural archives that preserved ancient documents in remarkably pristine condition, while highlighting the importance of systematic archaeological methodology for recovering and protecting cultural resources that might otherwise be lost to commercial antiquities trading or amateur excavation that lacked appropriate conservation expertise and scientific documentation standards. The international significance that the Dead Sea Scroll discoveries achieved reflected their contribution to understanding not only early Jewish religious development, but also the broader cultural and intellectual environment within which Christianity had emerged during the 1st century CE, where the presence of diverse theological traditions, messianic expectations, and apocalyptic frameworks provided essential background for comprehending how early Christian communities had developed their distinctive approaches to understanding Jesus' identity and the eschatological significance of his ministry, death, and resurrection. The technological innovations that enabled advanced analysis of the Dead Sea Scroll materials included infrared photography that revealed previously invisible text, computer-assisted reconstruction of fragmentary manuscripts, and digital databases that made these ancient texts accessible to researchers worldwide while creating permanent archives that would preserve this cultural heritage for future generations of scholars equipped with analytical techniques that had not yet been developed. The scholarly legacy that emerged from Dead Sea Scroll research established new methodological standards for approaching ancient manuscript discoveries, while demonstrating how systematic interdisciplinary collaboration could produce comprehensive understanding of complex historical and religious phenomena that required expertise in multiple academic disciplines and cultural traditions. The recognition that the Qumran discoveries had fundamentally transformed understanding of Second Temple Judaism created opportunities for reassessing numerous assumptions about early Jewish and Christian development that had been based on incomplete textual evidence. As we contemplate the remarkable archaeological serendipity that enabled recovery of ancient Enochic literature from Dead Sea caves, we witness how patient scientific methodology and international scholarly collaboration can validate manuscript traditions that had been preserved by marginalized religious communities while providing unprecedented access to authentic ancient voices that illuminate both historical understanding and contemporary spiritual reflection. The gentle rhythm of desert preservation and systematic excavation carries continuing invitations to appreciate both the favorable circumstances that enabled survival of organic materials in arid environments and the dedicated scientific work that transforms archaeological discoveries into enhanced understanding of humanity's diverse religious heritage and intellectual achievements. As the gentle starlight illuminates the ancient scrolls where Second Temple Jewish scribes carefully preserved their most extraordinary visionary literature, where the boundaries between earth and heaven dissolve into luminous descriptions of cosmic travel and divine revelation, we drift tonight into the remarkable narrative heart of the Book of Enoch, the detailed accounts of the patriarch's heavenly journeys through multiple celestial spheres, where angelic guides escort him past crystal walls and fiery mountains to witness the very throne room of the Most High God while receiving comprehensive instruction about cosmic secrets, divine judgment, and the ultimate destiny of both righteous and wicked souls. Let your mind float peacefully through these ancient descriptions of otherworldly landscapes and supernatural encounters, where Enoch serves as humanity's representative in the divine court while learning the hidden workings of cosmic justice and celestial administration that govern both natural processes and moral accountability throughout the universe. Close your eyes and feel the profound sense of transcendence that must have inspired ancient readers as they followed Enoch's guided tours through realms of pure light and divine glory, encountering archangels whose names and functions would influence Jewish and Christian angelology for centuries, while receiving revelations about calendar systems, astronomical knowledge, and eschatological events that demonstrated the sophisticated theological imagination of communities seeking divine guidance. For understanding their place within cosmic history and ultimate redemption. Picture yourself beside Enoch as he begins his first heavenly journey under the guidance of the Archangel Uriel, who serves as both protector and instructor while leading the bewildered patriarch through successive levels of celestial reality that reveal the systematic organization of divine administration and the complex hierarchies of spiritual beings who serve God's purposes in maintaining cosmic order and executing divine judgment upon both fallen angels and corrupted humanity. The initial stages of Enoch's ascent take him past the boundaries of ordinary earthly existence into regions where the normal laws of physics and geography give way to supernatural landscapes characterized by crystal structures, precious stones, and luminous materials that reflect the perfect purity and eternal stability of divine reality. The systematic description of Enoch's heavenly travels reveals ancient Jewish understanding of cosmic geography as a multi-tiered reality where different levels of spiritual authority correspond to distinct regions of celestial space, creating comprehensive frameworks for understanding how divine government operates through delegated responsibility while maintaining ultimate sovereignty over all aspects of creation, judgment, and redemption. The seven heavens that Enoch traverses each contain specific groups of spiritual beings with particular functions in cosmic administration, from the angels who control weather patterns and seasonal changes to the cherubim and seraphim who surround the divine throne while participating in eternal worship and implementing divine decrees. Watch as the narrative unfolds through Enoch's encounters with the four principal archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, whose individual responsibilities encompass different aspects of divine activity in both spiritual and material realms. Michael serves as the commander of heavenly armies and the special protector of the righteous. Gabriel functions as God's messenger and the angel of divine revelation. Raphael oversees healing and restoration while guiding souls through spiritual transformation. And Uriel administers divine justice while revealing cosmic secrets and eschatological knowledge to chosen human recipients like Enoch himself. The detailed descriptions of the divine throne room that Enoch receives during his ultimate heavenly encounter emphasize both the overwhelming transcendence of God's glory and the systematic order that characterizes divine administration, where the Ancient of Days sits upon a throne of crystal surrounded by rivers of fire while countless spiritual beings offer continuous worship and await divine commands for implementing cosmic justice and redemption. The vision emphasizes that despite God's absolute transcendence, divine government operates through systematic delegation of authority to spiritual beings who serve as intermediaries between the ineffable divine essence and the complex requirements of governing both spiritual and material creation. The astronomical revelations that occupy significant portions of Enoch's heavenly instruction include detailed information about the movements of sun, moon, and stars according to divine law rather than natural causation, where celestial bodies serve as cosmic timepieces that enable proper calculation of religious festivals, agricultural seasons, and eschatological events, while demonstrating God's sovereign control over natural processes that might otherwise appear to operate according to impersonal physical laws. The 364-day solar calendar that Enoch receives during his heavenly journey reflects ancient Jewish conviction that proper worship requires accurate timekeeping based on divine revelation rather than human observation or pagan astronomical systems. The prophetic dimensions of Enoch's heavenly journeys include comprehensive visions of future events that will culminate in divine judgment upon wickedness and the establishment of God's eternal kingdom, where the righteous will be vindicated and the wicked will receive appropriate punishment for their violations of cosmic law and moral responsibility. The detailed descriptions of eschatological events emphasize both divine justice and mercy, where punishment serves corrective rather than merely retributive purposes, while redemption remains available for those who repent and return to proper covenant relationship with God and righteous behavior toward fellow human beings. The literary artistry that characterizes the Book of Enoch's presentation of heavenly journeys demonstrates sophisticated narrative techniques that create sustained reader engagement while communicating complex theological concepts through vivid imagery, dramatic encounters, and systematic revelation that builds comprehension gradually through carefully structured progression from earthly concerns to cosmic perspectives that illuminate the ultimate meaning and purpose of human existence within divine history and eschatological fulfillment. The influence that Enochic descriptions of heavenly journeys exercised upon subsequent Jewish and Christian mystical literature becomes evident through comparison with later works such as the Hecalot literature, the Testament of Levi, and various Christian apocalypses that employed similar themes, imagery, and narrative structures while adapting Enochic traditions to serve different theological purposes and community needs. The sophisticated angelology and cosmic geography that characterize Enoch's heavenly travels provided essential conceptual frameworks for understanding spiritual reality and divine administration that would influence both popular piety and scholarly theology for centuries. The theological significance of Enoch's role as heavenly scribe and intercessor reflects ancient Jewish understanding of how divine revelation reaches human communities through specially chosen intermediaries who possess both spiritual authority and pastoral concern for their earthly contemporaries facing persecution, moral confusion, and eschatological uncertainty requiring divine guidance and supernatural encouragement. Enoch's function as mediator between heavenly and earthly realms demonstrates how prophetic revelation serves both individual spiritual development and collective community needs for understanding their place within cosmic history and divine purposes. The comparative analysis that connects Enochic heavenly journey traditions with similar visionary literature from other ancient Near Eastern cultures reveals common patterns in how different civilizations understood the possibility of human access to divine knowledge through mystical experience and supernatural revelation, while highlighting the distinctive contributions that Jewish theological reflection made to understanding the relationship between cosmic order, moral responsibility, and ultimate spiritual destiny that transcends ordinary earthly concerns and limitations. The psychological insights that emerge from careful study of Enoch's heavenly journeys include recognition that ancient communities possessed sophisticated understanding of how visionary experience could serve both individual spiritual transformation and collective identity formation, through providing alternative perspectives on present suffering and uncertainty that enabled hope, moral clarity, and sustained commitment to righteous behavior despite challenging circumstances and apparent divine absence or indifference to human concerns about justice and redemption. The scholarly significance that contemporary biblical studies recognizes in Enochic heavenly journey narratives extends beyond their historical importance for understanding Second Temple Jewish apocalypticism to encompass their contribution to comparative religious studies, mystical theology, and the phenomenology of religious experience that illuminates universal aspects of human spiritual seeking while demonstrating the remarkable creative abilities of ancient authors who transformed religious insight into comprehensive literary works that continue serving spiritual and intellectual needs across diverse cultural contexts. The textual complexity that characterizes different versions of Enoch's heavenly journeys reflects the dynamic nature of ancient Jewish visionary tradition, where successive generations of scribes and spiritual teachers adapted traditional materials to address contemporary theological concerns, while maintaining essential insights about divine transcendence, cosmic order, and the possibility of human participation in heavenly reality through appropriate spiritual development and divine grace that enables transcendence of ordinary limitations and access to supernatural knowledge and blessed communion with divine reality. The mystical dimensions of Enochic heavenly journey traditions invite contemplative engagement with questions about the nature of spiritual experience, the possibility of direct divine encounter, and the relationship between visionary imagination and authentic revelation that continues challenging contemporary religious communities seeking to distinguish between genuine spiritual insight and psychological projection or cultural conditioning that might masquerade as divine communication while lacking authentic transformative power and community benefit. As we contemplate the remarkable visionary sophistication of Enoch's heavenly journeys, we witness how ancient Jewish communities developed comprehensive frameworks for understanding cosmic reality while maintaining conviction that human consciousness could transcend earthly limitations through appropriate spiritual development and divine grace. The patient work of both ancient visionaries and modern scholars continues, revealing new dimensions of how these heavenly journey traditions served ancient communities while providing contemporary readers with valuable insights into the universal human quest for transcendent meaning, divine encounter, and ultimate participation in the cosmic processes that govern existence, transformation, and eternal destiny within the mysterious purposes of divine love and justice, the gentle rhythm of celestial ascent and the eternal quest for divine vision carry continuing invitations to appreciate both the remarkable theological sophistication and spiritual insight that characterize systematic approaches to understanding heavenly reality through visionary experience and contemplative reflection that serves both individual transformation and collective wisdom about the ultimate nature and purpose of human existence within cosmic history and eschatological hope. As the gentle flicker of candlelight casts dancing shadows across the scholarly chambers of early Christian monasteries, where devoted church fathers labored through long nights to establish the sacred boundaries of orthodox doctrine and canonical scripture, we drift tonight into the complex story of why the Book of Enoch, despite its obvious influence on New Testament writers and its acceptance among many early Christian communities, was ultimately excluded from the biblical canon and branded as dangerous pseudepigraphic literature that threatened ecclesiastical authority and theological unity. Let your mind float peacefully through the careful deliberations of 4th and 5th century church councils, where bishops and theologians wrestled with fundamental questions about apostolic authority, doctrinal orthodoxy, and the proper sources of divine revelation while navigating the complex political pressures that accompanied Christianity's transformation from persecuted minority to imperial religion. Close your eyes and feel the profound weight of responsibility that must have characterized these ecclesiastical leaders as they sought to preserve essential Christian truth while eliminating texts that might confuse or mislead ordinary believers who lacked the theological sophistication necessary for distinguishing between authentic apostolic teaching and later pseudepigraphic elaborations that reflected Jewish apocalyptic speculation. Rather than genuine Christian revelation, picture yourself in the Great Library of Caesarea around 380 CE, where Jerome, the brilliant biblical scholar who would create the Latin Vulgate translation, carefully examines various manuscripts while developing the systematic criteria that would guide canonical decisions for centuries to come. Jerome's extensive knowledge of Hebrew, Greek, and Latin texts enabled him to recognize that the Book of Enoch, despite its antiquity and spiritual appeal, lacked the apostolic authorship and consistent theological message that characterized authentic New Testament writings, leading him to categorize it among the apocryphal works that might contain valuable historical insights while failing to meet the standards necessary for inclusion in the sacred scriptures that would guide Christian worship, doctrine, and spiritual formation across the growing church. The theological concerns that motivated early church fathers to exclude Enochic literature from the canonical Bible reflected deeper anxieties about maintaining doctrinal purity and ecclesiastical control during the crucial centuries when Christianity was establishing its institutional foundations and systematic theological frameworks. The Book of Enoch's detailed angelology, with its elaborate hierarchies of spiritual beings and complex mythologies of cosmic rebellion, presented alternative explanations for the origin of evil that potentially conflicted with emerging Christian teaching about human moral responsibility, divine sovereignty, and the centrality of Christ's redemptive work in overcoming sin and death through incarnation, crucifixion, and resurrection. Watch as the systematic critique develops through the writings of influential church fathers like Epiphanius of Salamis, who condemned the Book of Enoch as dangerous heterodox literature that encouraged excessive speculation about angelic beings and cosmic secrets while distracting believers from the essential Christian focus on practical holiness, charitable behavior, and faithful participation in the sacramental life of the Church. Epiphanius's Panarian or medicine chest against heresies, specifically targeted Enochic traditions as sources of theological confusion that enabled various Gnostic and sectarian movements to claim ancient authority for their alternative interpretations of Christian doctrine and practice. The canonical decisions reached by the synods of Hippo, 393 CE, and Carthage, 397 CE, formalized the exclusion of the Book of Enoch from the official biblical canon while establishing systematic criteria for distinguishing between authentic apostolic writings and later pseudepigraphic literature that might contain valuable spiritual insights while lacking the divine inspiration and ecclesiastical authority necessary for serving as foundations of Christian doctrine and liturgical practice. These councils emphasized that canonical books must demonstrate apostolic origin, consistent theological message, widespread acceptance among Orthodox Christian communities, and spiritual power for edifying believers and building up the Church. The influence of Augustine of Hippo in shaping ecclesiastical attitudes toward Enochic literature cannot be overstated, as his theological authority and systematic approach to biblical interpretation established precedents that would guide Western Christianity for over a millennium. Augustine's conviction that canonical scripture must be limited to texts with clear apostolic connections led him to reject the Book of Enoch despite acknowledging its obvious influence on biblical writers, arguing that apostolic authors might reference ancient traditions without necessarily endorsing their complete theological accuracy or canonical status for future Christian communities. The socio-political context that surrounded early Christian canonical decisions included the complex pressures of imperial favor and institutional consolidation that accompanied Christianity's legal recognition under Constantine and its subsequent establishment as the official Roman religion. Church leaders recognized that maintaining theological unity and doctrinal clarity required systematic approaches to scriptural authority that could withstand both internal sectarian challenges and external philosophical criticism from educated pagan intellectuals who questioned Christian claims about divine revelation and cosmic purpose. The systematic exclusion of apocalyptic literature like the Book of Enoch reflected broader ecclesiastical concerns about maintaining proper balance between mystical spirituality and practical pastoral responsibility, where church authorities worried that excessive emphasis on visionary experiences and esoteric knowledge might undermine the institutional authority and sacramental mediation that characterized emerging Catholic Christianity. The detailed descriptions of heavenly journeys and cosmic secrets that filled Enochic literature potentially encouraged individualistic approaches to spiritual development that bypassed ecclesiastical guidance and communal accountability. The hermeneutical challenges that the Book of Enoch presented to early Christian interpreters included its attribution to an antediluvian patriarch rather than an apostolic author, its complex literary history involving multiple authors and editorial layers, and its theological concepts that required sophisticated interpretation to reconcile with developing Christian doctrine about incarnation, atonement, and eschatological hope. Church Fathers concluded that such texts, while historically interesting and spiritually challenging, lacked the clarity and authority necessary for serving as reliable guides to Christian faith and practice. The practical consequences of excluding the Book of Enoch from the biblical canon included its gradual disappearance from Western Christian consciousness and its preservation only in marginal communities like the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which maintained different canonical traditions and theological emphases that enabled continued appreciation for Enochic wisdom and apocalyptic spirituality. This geographical and cultural division demonstrates how canonical decisions reflected not only theological considerations but also regional differences in ecclesiastical authority and cultural identity. The comparative analysis of how different Christian communities approached Enochic literature reveals the complex relationship between scriptural authority, theological interpretation, and institutional power that characterized early Christian development, where communities with stronger Jewish backgrounds often maintained greater appreciation for apocalyptic traditions, while churches influenced by Greek philosophical culture emphasized rational theology and systematic doctrine over visionary speculation and mythological narrative. The scholarly recognition that contemporary biblical studies accords to the Book of Enoch reflects growing appreciation for the theological diversity and intellectual sophistication that characterized early Christian development, where modern researchers understand canonical exclusion as reflecting particular historical circumstances and ecclesiastical priorities rather than absolute judgments about spiritual value or theological insight. The availability of complete Enochic texts enables contemporary scholars to appreciate both the reasons for ancient canonical decisions and the continuing relevance of alternative spiritual traditions. The ironic reversal that characterizes modern attitudes toward the Book of Enoch includes recognition that its exclusion from the biblical canon may have inadvertently preserved its theological independence and spiritual authenticity by preventing its incorporation into the systematic doctrinal frameworks that sometimes constrain the interpretive freedom and mystical power of canonical texts through centuries of ecclesiastical control and theological systematization. We contemplate the complex factors that led early Christian authorities to ban the Book of Enoch from canonical acceptance. We witness how institutional needs for theological unity and doctrinal clarity sometimes conflict with the rich diversity and spiritual creativity that characterize authentic religious experience and mystical insight. The patient work of both ancient church fathers and modern scholars continues, revealing new dimensions of how canonical decisions shaped Christian development, while demonstrating the continuing relevance of marginalized traditions for contemporary communities seeking comprehensive understanding of ancient spiritual wisdom and its potential contributions to modern religious life and theological reflection. The gentle rhythm of ecclesiastical deliberation and the eternal quest for theological truth carry continuing invitations to appreciate both the sincere pastoral concerns that motivated ancient canonical decisions and the ongoing value of alternative spiritual traditions that preserve insights about divine mystery and cosmic purpose that transcend the limitations of particular institutional frameworks and historical circumstances. As the gentle highland winds whisper across the ancient monasteries of Ethiopia, where the eternal rhythms of Orthodox Christian devotion have maintained their sacred trust through 15 centuries of isolation from the broader Christian world, we drift tonight into the remarkable story of how the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church became the sole guardian of the complete Book of Enoch, preserving every chapter, verse, and theological insight of this forbidden text, while European Christianity systematically eliminated it from memory and manuscript collections. Let your mind float peacefully through the patient dedication of Ethiopian monks and scribes, whose unwavering conviction that Enoch represented authentic divine revelation enabled them to maintain careful copying traditions and protective storage practices that would safeguard this ancient wisdom through foreign invasions, religious persecution, and the natural decay that threatens all organic manuscripts across centuries of environmental challenge and political upheaval. Close your eyes and feel the profound sense of sacred responsibility that must have characterized these faithful communities as they recognized themselves as custodians of theological treasures that the wider Christian world had abandoned, creating an unbroken chain of preservation that would eventually enable the text's miraculous return to Western scholarly attention through James Bruce's 18th-century expedition to the source of the Blue Nile. Picture yourself in the ancient scriptorium of Debre-Libano's monastery during the 7th century, where dedicated Ethiopian scribes carefully copy the complete Book of Enoch from earlier GEZ manuscripts, while maintaining the distinctive canonical traditions that set their church apart from both Eastern Orthodox and Western Catholic Christianity. The Ethiopian Orthodox Biblical Canon, which includes 81 books compared to the 66 accepted by most Protestant churches, reflects the community's conviction that divine revelation encompassed a broader range of ancient texts than other Christian traditions had recognized, creating theological frameworks that honored both apostolic writings and earlier Jewish apocalyptic literature as equally authoritative sources of spiritual guidance and doctrinal instruction. The linguistic achievement that enabled Ethiopian preservation of the Book of Enoch involved the systematic translation of ancient Hebrew and Greek texts into GEZ, the classical liturgical language of Ethiopian Christianity. During the 4th and 5th centuries, when the Kingdom of Aksum was establishing its distinctive Christian identity under the influence of Syrian missionaries, who brought comprehensive manuscript collections from the broader Eastern Christian world. The careful work of early Ethiopian translators preserved not only the complete text of Enoch, but also numerous other ancient works that had already begun disappearing from Mediterranean Christian communities, demonstrating remarkable foresight about the importance of maintaining theological diversity and textual completeness. Watch as the systematic manuscript culture develops through centuries of Ethiopian monastic dedication, where communities scattered across the highland regions of Tigray, Amhara, and Shua maintained independent copying traditions while sharing standardized textual variants that ensured remarkable consistency in the preserved GEZ version of the Book of Enoch across multiple monastery libraries and regional scriptoria. The paleographic evidence suggests that Ethiopian scribes employed sophisticated quality control methods that minimized copying errors while maintaining faithful transmission of complex theological concepts and mythological narratives that required careful attention to detail and deep understanding of apocalyptic literary conventions. The institutional structures that supported Ethiopian manuscript preservation included extensive monastery networks with specialized scriptoria, dedicated copying, schedules that ensured regular production of fresh manuscripts to replace worn copies, and systematic training programs that prepared successive generations of scribes in the technical skills necessary for accurate textual transmission, while cultivating the spiritual discipline required for approaching sacred texts with appropriate reverence and theological understanding. The Ethiopian Church's emphasis on communal reading and liturgical usage created practical needs for multiple copies of canonical texts that motivated sustained copying activities across centuries. The theological significance that Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity attributed to the Book of Enoch extended beyond its function as historical literature to encompass its role in doctrinal education, spiritual formation, and liturgical celebration, where Enochic traditions about angelic hierarchies, cosmic judgment, and eschatological hope provided essential frameworks for understanding Christian salvation within the broader context of cosmic history and divine purpose. The Ethiopian Church's systematic incorporation of Enochic imagery into hymnic traditions, iconographic programs, and theological commentary created comprehensive cultural contexts that reinforced the text's canonical authority while ensuring its continued relevance for community life. The preservation challenges that Ethiopian monasteries navigated across 15 centuries included periodic invasions by Islamic forces, internal political conflicts that threatened monastery stability, environmental hazards such as fires and floods that could destroy manuscript collections, and the gradual deterioration of organic writing materials that required constant attention and periodic copying to prevent permanent loss of textual traditions. The remarkable success of Ethiopian preservation efforts demonstrates both favorable climatic conditions in highland regions and sophisticated institutional approaches to cultural conservation. The scholarly traditions that developed within Ethiopian Orthodox intellectual culture included systematic commentary writing, comparative textual analysis, and theological interpretation that treated the Book of Enoch as equally authoritative with other canonical scriptures while recognizing its distinctive contributions to understanding divine revelation and cosmic order. Ethiopian scholars developed sophisticated hermeneutical approaches that integrated Enochic theology with broader Christian doctrine while maintaining appreciation for the text's unique insights about angelic activity, prophetic revelation, and eschatological judgment that distinguished it from other biblical literature. The liturgical integration that characterized Ethiopian Orthodox use of the Book of Enoch included its incorporation into lectionary cycles, feast day celebrations, and monastic prayer practices that made Enochic traditions living components of community worship, rather than merely historical curiosities preserved for scholarly study. The systematic inclusion of Enochic themes in Ethiopian Christian art, music, and theological education created comprehensive cultural frameworks that supported continued manuscript preservation while ensuring intergenerational transmission of essential theological insights and spiritual practices. The comparative isolation that enabled Ethiopian preservation of the Book of Enoch reflected both geographical factors that limited contact with Mediterranean Christianity and theological independence that enabled the Ethiopian Church to maintain distinctive canonical traditions despite periodic pressure from foreign missionaries who advocated conformity with Eastern Orthodox or Catholic biblical standards. The Ethiopian Church's conviction about its apostolic origins and theological authority enabled resistance to external pressure for canonical revision while maintaining confidence in traditional manuscript collections. The manuscript variants that characterize different Ethiopian copies of the Book of Enoch illuminate the complex processes of textual transmission while demonstrating remarkable overall consistency that suggests careful attention to preserving authentic readings rather than introducing theological modifications or contemporary adaptations that might reflect changing doctrinal emphases or cultural circumstances. The availability of multiple Ethiopian manuscripts enables contemporary scholars to reconstruct reliable critical editions while appreciating the sophisticated scribal practices that maintain textual integrity across centuries. The cultural significance that the Book of Enoch achieved within Ethiopian Orthodox tradition extends beyond its religious importance to encompass its function as a distinctive marker of Ethiopian Christian identity that distinguished their theological heritage from other Christian communities while providing sources of national pride and cultural continuity that connected contemporary believers with ancient traditions of divine revelation and prophetic insight. The Ethiopian Church's successful preservation of forbidden texts demonstrates how marginalized communities can serve essential roles in maintaining cultural diversity and intellectual heritage. The international recognition that Ethiopian manuscript preservation has achieved among contemporary biblical scholars reflects growing appreciation for the remarkable cultural achievement represented by maintaining complete ancient texts through 15 centuries of historical challenge while enabling modern academic access to theological traditions that might otherwise have been permanently lost to human memory and scholarly investigation. The patient work of Ethiopian scribes continues inspiring modern conservation efforts while demonstrating how traditional religious communities can serve essential functions in preserving human intellectual heritage. As we contemplate the extraordinary dedication that enabled Ethiopian Orthodox communities to preserve the complete Book of Enoch through 15 centuries of historical upheaval and cultural change, we witness how sincere religious conviction and systematic institutional commitment can safeguard essential spiritual treasures while maintaining theological independence and cultural authenticity despite pressure for conformity with dominant religious traditions. The gentle rhythm of monastic copying and the eternal commitment to preserving sacred wisdom carry continuing invitations to appreciate both the remarkable achievement of Ethiopian manuscript culture and the ongoing responsibility that contemporary communities bear for protecting ancient texts and traditional knowledge that illuminate humanity's diverse spiritual heritage and continuing quest for divine understanding across the vast expanse of cultural development and religious experience. As the gentle fluorescent light illuminates the climate-controlled manuscript examination rooms where contemporary biblical scholars continue their patient analysis of ancient Enochic texts through high-powered magnifying equipment and spectral imaging technology, we drift tonight into the fascinating world of modern textual criticism, the systematic scientific methodology that has transformed our understanding of how the Book of Enoch developed across centuries of copying, translation, and theological adaptation. Let your mind float peacefully through the quiet precision of paleographic investigation, where specialists in ancient writing systems carefully compare letter forms, scribal practices, and orthographic conventions preserved in Ethiopian manuscripts, Aramaic fragments, and Greek quotations to reconstruct the complex textual history of this remarkable apocalyptic work. Close your eyes and feel the profound satisfaction that characterizes contemporary researchers as they employ cutting-edge analytical techniques to solve mysteries that have puzzled scholars for generations, creating comprehensive critical editions that preserve both the authentic ancient readings and the fascinating variations that illuminate how different communities adapted Enochic traditions to serve their distinctive theological needs and cultural circumstances. Picture yourself in the Paleography Laboratory at Oxford University, where specialists like Matthew Black and Michael Knibb spent decades creating the definitive critical edition of 1 Enoch by systematically comparing over 30 Ethiopian manuscripts with the fragmentary Aramaic texts discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Establishing methodological standards for textual analysis that enable precise reconstruction of the most probable original readings while documenting the fascinating scribal variations that reveal how ancient communities understood and transmitted this complex theological work. The patient work of manuscript collation requires extraordinary attention to detail, where researchers must examine thousands of individual words and phrases across multiple textual witnesses while evaluating the relative reliability of different manuscript traditions and translation practices. The technological innovations that have revolutionized contemporary Enoch studies include multispectral imaging that reveals previously invisible text on damaged manuscripts, computer-assisted statistical analysis of scribal patterns and linguistic variations, and digital databases that enable instant comparison of readings across all known textual witnesses while providing researchers worldwide with unprecedented access to high-quality manuscript reproductions and scholarly annotations. These advanced analytical tools have confirmed the essential accuracy of Ethiopian textual transmission while revealing subtle but significant variations that illuminate how different communities interpreted and applied Enochic teachings. Watch as the systematic comparison between Qumran Aramaic fragments and Ethiopian Ge'ez manuscripts demonstrates the remarkable fidelity of ancient translation practices, where careful linguistic analysis reveals that Ethiopian translators preserved not only the essential meaning of original texts but also maintained sophisticated theological concepts and mythological narratives with impressive accuracy across multiple centuries of cultural and linguistic transmission. The few discrepancies that exist between different textual traditions often reflect legitimate alternative interpretations rather than scribal errors, suggesting that ancient communities possessed sophisticated understanding of textual variation and interpretive flexibility. The paleographic analysis that enables precise dating of manuscript materials employs systematic comparison of letter forms, writing styles, and scribal conventions across hundreds of dated texts from different historical periods, creating comprehensive databases of paleographic evidence that enable researchers to establish chronological frameworks for understanding when different versions of Enochic literature were copied and transmitted through various scholarly and religious communities. The careful study of ink composition, parchment preparation, and binding techniques provides additional chronological indicators while revealing the sophisticated manuscript production methods that characterized ancient Jewish and Christian scriptoria. The linguistic investigations that accompany textual criticism include detailed analysis of Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and Ge'ez vocabulary, grammar, and syntax that enables scholars to trace the developmental history of Enochic traditions while identifying the probable linguistic contexts within which different sections were composed and translated. The recognition that various parts of 1 Enoch were originally written in different languages and subsequently translated through multiple linguistic stages has enhanced understanding of the text's composite nature and complex editorial history. The comparative methodology that characterizes modern Enoch scholarship involves systematic analysis of parallel traditions preserved in other ancient Jewish texts such as Jubilees, Testament of Levi, and various Qumran sectarian writings that contain similar themes, imagery, and theological concepts while demonstrating how Enochic traditions influenced broader patterns of Second Temple Jewish apocalyptic thought and literary development. These comparative studies reveal the remarkable creativity and theological sophistication that characterized ancient Jewish approaches to understanding cosmic conflict, divine judgment, and eschatological hope. The critical editions that emerge from this scholarly work represent decades of collaborative international research involving specialists in Semitic languages, comparative religion, manuscript studies, and archaeological methodology who contribute diverse expertise to the complex tasks of textual reconstruction, translation, and historical contextualization that enable contemporary readers to encounter Enochic literature in forms that approximate as closely as possible the ancient author's original intentions and theological insights. The scholarly consensus that has emerged from systematic textual analysis confirms that the Book of Enoch represents authentic Second Temple Jewish apocalyptic literature composed between the 3rd century BCE and the 1st century CE by multiple authors who drew upon earlier traditions while addressing contemporary theological concerns about foreign domination, religious persecution, and eschatological hope. The recognition that different sections reflect distinct historical circumstances and theological emphases has enhanced appreciation for the text's complex development while validating its significance for understanding the diverse intellectual currents that characterized early Judaism. The methodological advances that continue emerging from Enoch studies include improved techniques for analyzing fragmentary materials, enhanced understanding of ancient translation practices, and sophisticated approaches to evaluating textual relationships that serve broader biblical scholarship while establishing precedents for analyzing other ancient religious texts discovered through archaeological excavation or preserved in marginalized religious communities. The international collaboration that characterizes contemporary Enoch research includes partnerships between universities, research institutes, and religious communities that possess manuscript collections, creating comprehensive scholarly networks that transcend national and confessional boundaries while demonstrating how academic cooperation can serve both specialized research objectives and broader educational goals that make ancient wisdom accessible to diverse contemporary audiences seeking understanding of humanity's religious heritage. The digital humanities applications that enhance modern Enoch scholarship include online databases, searchable text collections, and collaborative annotation platforms that enable researchers worldwide to contribute to ongoing scholarly conversations while providing students and general readers with unprecedented access to critical editions, translations, and scholarly commentaries that illuminate both the historical significance and continuing relevance of ancient apocalyptic literature for contemporary religious and philosophical reflection. As we contemplate the remarkable scholarly achievements that have transformed modern understanding of the Book of Enoch through systematic application of scientific methodology to ancient religious texts, we witness how patient collaborative research can recover authentic ancient voices while preserving the complex textual heritage that enables contemporary communities to encounter theological insights and spiritual wisdom that have survived across millennia of cultural transformation and religious development. The gentle rhythm of scholarly investigation and the eternal commitment to textual accuracy carry continuing invitations to appreciate both the sophisticated analytical methods that characterize modern biblical scholarship and the profound respect for ancient wisdom that motivates careful preservation of humanity's diverse religious heritage and intellectual achievements. As the gentle evening stars begin their eternal watch over the quiet research libraries where contemporary scholars continue studying the remarkable legacy of the Book of Enoch, where ancient apocalyptic visions meet modern theological inquiry through careful manuscript analysis and comparative religious studies, we arrive tonight at the serene conclusion of our journey through this forbidden text's extraordinary survival and rediscovery, a work whose sophisticated angelology, cosmic mythology, and prophetic insights continue whispering across 2 millennia about eternal questions that transcend any single religious tradition or historical period. Let your mind drift peacefully through the timeless concerns that connect these ancient Jewish voices to our contemporary search for meaning, where each carefully preserved vision of heavenly journeys and divine judgment speaks across the centuries about humanity's enduring quest to understand our place within cosmic processes that govern both individual destiny and collective spiritual development. Close your eyes and feel the profound presence of those Second Temple communities whose patient theological reflection nearly 2,000 years ago continues teaching us about moral responsibility, spiritual transcendence, and the mysterious relationship between earthly suffering and ultimate divine justice that challenges every generation to discover deeper truths about the sacred patterns that unite all authentic religious experience across the vast expanse of cultural transformation and intellectual development. Picture yourself in quiet contemplation at the intersection of ancient wisdom and contemporary questioning, where research facilities house both precious Ethiopian manuscripts and sophisticated analytical equipment, feeling the gentle presence of concerns that transcend any single historical period or theological framework. What does it mean to receive divine revelation through visionary experience? How do spiritual communities maintain essential insights while adapting to changing social and intellectual circumstances? What responsibilities do modern scholars bear toward ancient religious traditions? And what wisdom can 2,000-year-old apocalyptic literature offer to contemporary communities seeking guidance for navigating unprecedented technological challenges and environmental uncertainties? The Book of Enoch serves as more than historical curiosity. It functions as living bridge connecting ancient insights about cosmic conflict and divine purpose with modern questions about consciousness, reality, and the ultimate meaning of human existence within an apparently infinite universe. The remarkable preservation of Enochic wisdom through Ethiopian Orthodox dedication reminds us that some spiritual insights transcend the boundaries of institutional authority and historical circumstance, connecting us directly to ancient communities who faced many of the same fundamental questions that continue challenging contemporary seekers attempting to understand the relationship between individual moral choices and cosmic significance, between present suffering and ultimate justice, between rational analysis and spiritual intuition that characterizes authentic approaches to understanding divine mystery and human spiritual potential. Watch as the ongoing scholarly investigation continues, revealing new dimensions of ancient Jewish apocalypticism that expand our understanding of religious diversity while raising additional questions about the nature of prophetic vision, the relationship between mythological narrative and historical truth, and the possibility of accessing transcendent knowledge through contemplative practices that engage both intellectual rigor and spiritual sensitivity. Each new translation and comparative analysis provides answers to specific historical questions while simultaneously opening pathways to deeper mysteries that ensure Enoch studies will continue for generations. With future researchers possessing analytical tools and interpretive frameworks we cannot yet imagine for extracting spiritual wisdom from these precious ancient sources. The international recognition that the Book of Enoch has achieved among contemporary religious scholars demonstrates the universal significance of apocalyptic literature for understanding how different cultures have addressed eternal concerns about cosmic justice, divine transcendence, and the ultimate destiny of both righteous and wicked individuals within frameworks of meaning that provide hope and moral guidance despite evident suffering and apparent divine absence. The careful study of Enochic traditions contributes valuable perspectives to comparative religious studies, consciousness research, and philosophical theology that help modern communities understand common patterns and unique innovations in how ancient civilizations approached fundamental questions about existence, purpose, and spiritual development. The theological implications of taking the Book of Enoch seriously as ancient religious literature extend beyond academic interest in Second Temple Judaism to encompass contemporary discussions about the nature of religious authority, the possibility of direct divine revelation, and the relationship between mythological imagination and spiritual truth in traditions that emphasize experiential encounter with transcendent reality rather than purely rational or institutional approaches to understanding divine mystery and cosmic purpose. The mystical dimensions of Enochic literature invite contemplative engagement rather than merely historical analysis, as the ancient texts consistently emphasize that authentic knowledge of divine reality emerges through spiritual transformation and visionary experience rather than conceptual study or systematic theology alone. The communities that preserved and transmitted Enochic traditions understood their apocalyptic narratives as invitations to spiritual development rather than literal descriptions of cosmic events, using mythological language to communicate truths about consciousness, moral responsibility, and divine judgment that transcend ordinary linguistic and cultural limitations. The contemporary challenges that face ancient spiritual wisdom in modern contexts include not only the technical difficulties of manuscript preservation and scholarly interpretation, but also the need to distinguish between authentic spiritual insight and romanticized appropriation that fails to appreciate the cultural specificity and theological sophistication of ancient religious traditions, while seeking to extract timeless wisdom that serves contemporary spiritual needs without compromising either historical understanding or modern intellectual integrity. The educational value of studying the Book of Enoch and related apocalyptic literature extends far beyond academic circles to encompass public engagement opportunities that help diverse audiences appreciate both the intellectual sophistication and spiritual depth that characterized ancient approaches to questions about divine justice, cosmic meaning, and human spiritual potential. The careful presentation of this research challenges misconceptions about early religious uniformity while demonstrating the continuing relevance of alternative theological traditions for modern communities seeking more comprehensive and experientially grounded approaches to understanding transcendent reality and moral responsibility. The comparative religious implications of Enochic angelology and cosmic mythology provide valuable resources for contemporary interfaith dialogue, where ancient Jewish understanding of spiritual hierarchies, cosmic conflict, and divine mediation offers frameworks for understanding how different traditions have approached questions about the relationship between transcendent divinity and created reality, between individual spiritual development and collective redemption, between present moral choices and ultimate eschatological fulfillment. The psychological insights that emerge from careful study of Enochic literature include recognition that ancient communities possessed sophisticated understanding of how visionary experience serves both individual transformation and collective identity formation through providing alternative perspectives on present suffering that enable hope, moral clarity, and sustained commitment to righteousness despite challenging circumstances and apparent divine absence or indifference to human concerns. About justice, meaning, and spiritual development. The philosophical questions raised by studying the Book of Enoch in relationship to contemporary consciousness research include fundamental inquiries about the nature of religious experience, the possibility of accessing transcendent knowledge through altered states of consciousness, and the relationship between mythological narrative and spiritual truth that connects ancient apocalyptic literature with modern investigations into the hard problem of consciousness and the ultimate nature of reality itself. The environmental implications of Enochic themes about cosmic corruption and divine restoration speak to contemporary concerns about ecological crisis and sustainability, where ancient warnings about the consequences of violating natural order and divine law provide frameworks for understanding how human technological development and moral choices affect both immediate environmental conditions and ultimate planetary survival. Within cosmic processes that transcend immediate political and economic considerations. The continuing relevance of Enochic traditions for contemporary spiritual practice includes their contribution to understanding how ancient communities maintained hope and moral commitment despite persecution and suffering through cultivating visionary perspectives that connected earthly struggles with cosmic purposes and ultimate divine vindication. The systematic integration of apocalyptic insight with practical ethics demonstrates how transcendent vision can serve rather than escape from moral responsibility and social engagement. The future directions of Enochic studies will likely include continued archaeological research that reveals additional evidence of ancient apocalyptic traditions. Theoretical investigations that explore connections with contemporary neuroscience and consciousness studies, and practical applications that integrate ancient wisdom with modern challenges requiring both systematic analysis and spiritual insight for addressing unprecedented global circumstances requiring wisdom that transcends conventional political and economic approaches as we contemplate the profound questions raised by 2 millennia of Enochic preservation and study. We recognize that some spiritual insights unfold gradually across generations of patient investigation and contemplative practice, revealing their deepest meanings. Only to those who approach with appropriate reverence for ancient wisdom, intellectual honesty about contemporary limitations, and genuine commitment to understanding both the historical significance of apocalyptic literature and its continuing relevance for modern communities seeking authentic approaches to divine mystery, moral responsibility, and the eternal human quest for transcendent meaning within the cosmic processes that govern existence, transformation, and ultimate spiritual destiny. The gentle rhythm of eternal questions and the timeless flow of divine mystery carry continuing whispers of ancient visions and contemporary possibility that connect all generations in the shared human journey toward understanding our place within cosmic processes that transcend immediate historical circumstances while inviting each era to contribute its own insights to the never-ending conversation between human consciousness and ultimate reality that remains both utterly transcendent and intimately present within all authentic spiritual experience and intellectual inquiry, seeking wisdom about existence, purpose, and the mysterious relationship between individual moral choices and universal spiritual development.